In 1881, a man rides into a frontier town to collect a debt. But the debt isn't money. When Yates Cade finds Calla Prescott, the woman he once loved, he discovers her raising 2 children alone after being abandoned, barely surviving each day. Instead of demanding payment, he makes a bold offer no one expected: marriage in exchange for the debt. A risky decision that will change both their fates forever. Stay with this story until the end, hit like, and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The horse came up the main street at a walk, dust rising in lazy clouds behind its hooves. Yates Cade sat easy in the saddle, his coat grayed by 3 days of trail dirt, his hat pulled low against the afternoon glare. The town looked about how he'd expected: half-finished buildings, a saloon doing steady business, and faces that turned to watch him pass with the guarded curiosity people saved for strangers. He wasn't here for trouble, just business. The mare's shoes rang hollow on the warped planks outside the general store. Yates swung down, looped the reins over the rail, and stepped inside. The air smelled of sawdust, coffee, and something sharp he couldn't place. A woman stood behind the counter, middle-aged and stern-faced, watching him with the kind of look that sized a man up in seconds. "Help you?" she asked. "Looking for the Prescott place," Yates said. "Woman named Calla Prescott." The shopkeeper's expression shifted, something guarded slipping into place. "What's your business with her?" "Personal matter?" She sniffed. Personal matters have a way of turning into public ones in a town this size. Yates met her eyes without blinking. All the same. For a moment she didn't move. Then she jerked her chin toward the window. Out past the old mill road, half-mile maybe less. Little house with a broken fence. Can't miss it. He nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and turned to leave. "Mister?" He stopped. "She's had enough trouble," the woman said quietly. "Don't bring her more." Yates didn't answer. He walked back into the sunlight, mounted up, and rode out. The house sat at the edge of everything, where the town's ambition ran out and the land took over again. It was small, crooked in places, with a roof that looked like it might not last another hard rain. The fence leaned at odd angles, half the posts rotted through. A chicken scratched in the dirt near the porch, and somewhere out back, a child's voice rose in a thin wail before cutting off abruptly. Yates dismounted and tied the mare to what remained of the gate. He stood there a moment, looking at the place, feeling something twist in his chest that he didn't particularly want to name. Then the door opened. She stood framed in the doorway, one hand braced against the jamb, the other holding a dish towel. Her hair was darker than he remembered, pulled back in a rough knot. Her dress was faded, patched at the elbows, and hung loose in a way that spoke of weight lost too quickly. But her eyes, those were the same. Sharp and steady, even when everything else looked ready to fall apart. Yates? Just his name. No surprise in her voice, no warmth, no anger. Like she'd been expecting this, or something like it, for a long time. "Calla?" She didn't move from the doorway. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Wasn't sure myself." A long silence stretched between them. The chicken wandered closer, pecking at nothing. From inside the house came the sound of something breaking, followed by a child's startled cry. Calla closed her eyes briefly. I can wait." She looked at him for another moment, then turned and went back inside, leaving the door half open. Yates heard her voice, low and firm, speaking to the children. A small boy appeared in the doorway, maybe 4 years old, staring at Yates with wide eyes before his mother pulled him back. Yates took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. He'd ridden a long way for this conversation, and now that he was here, the words felt stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. Calla came back out, wiping her hands on the towel. She stepped off the porch and stood a few feet away, arms crossed. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders curved forward like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "So," she said, "what brings you out here?" "The loan." Her jaw tightened. "I figured. Your husband took $300 from me 2 years back, said he'd pay it in 6 months. He's gone." "I heard." "Then you know I don't have it." Yates nodded slowly. "I know." She looked away toward the broken fence, the struggling garden, the vast emptiness beyond. "I can give you $10 now, maybe 15 by fall if the crops come in." "That won't cover it." "I know that too." Her voice was flat, exhausted. But it's what I have. He watched her, this woman who used to laugh so easily it made everyone around her lighter. She didn't look like she remembered how anymore. There might be another way, he said. She turned back to him, suspicion flickering across her face. What kind of way? Marry me. The words came out simpler than he'd planned. Calla stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. What? Marry me. I'll forgive the debt. You and the children come with me, and we start over. Are you out of your mind? She stepped back, her arms dropping to her sides. You ride in here after 5 years and think you can just, what, buy me? That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing, Yates? Because it sure sounds like you're offering to pay $300 for a wife. He flinched at that, but didn't look away. I'm offering you a way out. This place is falling apart. Winter's going to be hard, and you're not going to make it through alone. I've made it this far. Barely. The word hung in the air between them, brutal and true. Calla's face went pale, then red. Get off my property. Calla, I said get off. Her voice shook, but her eyes were fierce. I didn't ask for your pity, and I sure as hell don't need your charity dressed up as a proposal. Yates put his hat back on slowly. It's not charity. Then what is it? He met her gaze, and for a moment something old and complicated passed between them. Memory, regret, something that might have been longing if either of them had let it. It's a second chance, he said quietly. She laughed, sharp and bitter. A second chance at what? We had our chance, Yates. You made your choice back then, and I made mine. And look where those choices got us. Don't, her voice cracked. Don't you dare stand there and judge what I've done with my life. I'm not judging. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. And the answer is no. Yates nodded once. He walked to his horse, untied the reins, but didn't mount. Instead, he stood there, one hand on the saddle, looking back at her. I'll be at the hotel for 3 days, he said, if you change your mind. I won't. He swung up into the saddle. $300 is a lot of money, Calla. Enough to take this place if I push it. I could have the sheriff out here tomorrow. Her face went hard. Then do it. I don't want to. But you will if I don't give you what you want. That's not... He stopped, exhaled sharply. I'm trying to help. I don't need help. I need to be left alone. Yates gathered the reins, his jaw tight. 3 days. He turned the mare and rode back toward town, leaving Calla standing in the yard with the broken fence and the tilting house and 2 children she was raising on hope and stubbornness alone. Nick. The hotel room was small and spare. A bed, a washstand, a window that looked out over the street. Yates sat on the edge of the mattress, his coat hung on a nail, his boots on the floor. In his hands, he turned a small wooden horse, worn smooth at the edges. He'd carved it years ago, back when he thought he might have a future that included children, before everything fell apart, before he left. There was a knock at the door. Yeah. The door opened, and a man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his vest. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. Heard you were in town, the sheriff said. News travels fast. It does when a stranger starts asking about Calla Prescott. The sheriff's eyes were sharp. What's your business with her? Personal matter. That's what you told Iris at the store. I'm asking you direct now. Yates set the wooden horse on the bed beside him. Her husband owed me money. I'm here to settle accounts. Duncan Prescott's been dead nearly a year. I know. Then you know Calla doesn't have what he owed you. She's barely keeping food on the table. I know that too. The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. So what are you planning to do about it? Made her an offer. She turned me down. What kind of offer? Yates looked at him evenly, the kind that's between me and her. They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, the sheriff pushed off the door. Calla Prescott's had a hard go of it, he said. Lost her parents young, married a man who turned out to be less than he promised, got left with 2 children and a pile of debt. This town looks after her as best we can. Good. I'm saying if you're here to make things harder for her, you and I are going to have a problem. Yates stood, meeting the sheriff eye to eye. I'm not here to make things harder. Then what are you here for? To give her a choice. The sheriff studied him for another moment, then nodded once and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Yates sat back down, picked up the wooden horse again, and turned it over in his hands. Outside, the sun was starting to dip, painting the street in long shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the sound of the saloon piano drifted through the evening air. He wondered if she'd come. He wondered if he wanted her to. Calcus. Calla stood at her kitchen table, hands braced on the scarred wood, staring at nothing. The children were in bed, Jonah asleep almost immediately, worn out from a day of running wild, and little Bess fighting it until her eyes finally closed. The house was quiet now, just the creak of settling boards and the whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls. $300. She could lose everything. The house, the land, what little she'd managed to scrape together. She'd be on the street with 2 children and nowhere to go. Or she could marry a man she hadn't seen in 5 years. A man who'd left without explanation, who'd broken something in her she thought had healed until she saw him standing in her yard today and felt it crack open all over again. She pressed her palms harder against the table, trying to steady herself. The truth was, she'd thought about him over the years. Wondered where he'd gone, what he was doing, if he ever thought about her. She'd tried to hate him for leaving, but hate took energy she didn't have to spare. So instead, she'd packed those feelings away and focused on surviving. And now here he was, offering her marriage like it was a business arrangement. Like the past didn't matter, like they could just start over. Could they? Calla straightened, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkness. The land stretched away into nothing, vast and indifferent. In the winter, the wind came screaming across those empty miles and found every crack in the walls, every weakness in the structure. Last year, she'd burned half the furniture just to keep the children warm. She couldn't do another winter like that. A soft sound from this bedroom made her turn. Bess stood in the doorway, clutching a rag doll, her hair tangled around her face. "Mama? What is it, sweetheart?" "I heard voices. Just talking to myself. Come on, back to bed." She scooped the girl up, carried her back to the narrow bed she shared with her brother, and tucked her in. Bess's eyes were already drooping again. "Mama," she murmured, "are we going to be okay?" Calla smoothed the hair back from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, baby, we're going to be fine." Bess smiled, reassured by the certainty in her mother's voice, and drifted back to sleep. Calla stood there for a long time, watching her children breathe in the darkness, and tried to believe her own words. The next day passed slowly. Yates spent the morning walking the town, getting a feel for the place. It was rough. Like most frontier settlements, optimistic and desperate in equal measure. Men with big plans and empty pockets. Women trying to make homes out of raw lumber and determination. He stopped at the livery, checked on his horse, and talked to the stable hand about the roads heading north. By afternoon, he was sitting on the hotel porch, watching the street and wondering if 3 days had been too long or not long enough. A wagon rolled past, loaded with lumber. 2 men argued outside the saloon. A woman hurried by with a basket, nodding politely as she passed. No sign of Calla. He told himself that was fine. She'd said no, and he ought to respect that. But the truth was, he didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not until he'd tried one more time to make her understand. The door behind him opened, and the hotel owner stepped out. "Mr. Cade?" "Yeah." "Someone here to see you." Yates stood, his heart kicking hard against his ribs. But when he turned, it wasn't Calla. It was a man, older, lean, with work-roughened hands and a face that had seen too much sun. He nodded at Yates. "Name's Garrett. I own the mill." "What can I do for you?" "Heard you made an offer to Calla Prescott." Yates's expression went flat. "Word gets around." "It does." Garrett stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't know what your game is, mister, but that woman's been through enough." "So I've been told." "Then you understand why folks around here are protective." "I do." Garrett studied him for a moment. "You serious about this? Or are you just trying to collect a debt by any means necessary?" Yates met his eyes. "I'm serious." "Why?" "That's between me and her. Not if you're planning to take her out of this town. Then it's everybody's business." Yates felt his temper stir, but he kept it leashed. I'm not trying to hurt her. Maybe not. But intentions don't count for much when a woman's got 2 children depending on her making the right choice. Garrett crossed his arms. Duncan Prescott made a lot of promises. Didn't keep any of them. Callah's gun shy, and she's got reason to be. I'm not Duncan. Prove it. How? Stick around. Don't push. Give her time to see you're not just another man looking to use her up and move on. Yates shook his head. I've got 3 days. Then I have business elsewhere. Then I guess you'll be leaving without her. He walked away, leaving Yates standing on the porch, frustration building in his chest. Check. That evening, Callah walked into town. She didn't plan to. She told herself she was just going to the store for supplies. But her feet carried her past the general store, past the mill, all the way to the hotel. She stood across the street, looking up at the second-floor windows, and tried to make herself turn around. But she couldn't, because the truth was, she was tired. Bone-deep, soul-weary tired. Tired of fighting, of scraping by, of lying awake at night wondering how she was going to feed her children through the winter. And Yates was offering her a way out. It wasn't love, it wasn't romance. But maybe, she thought, those things were luxuries she couldn't afford anymore. Maybe what mattered was survival, security, a roof that didn't leak, and a man who could shoulder some of the weight. Maybe that was enough. She crossed the street, climbed the steps, and pushed through the hotel door. The owner looked up from behind the desk. Help you, ma'am? I need to see Yates Cade. The man's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment. Room 7, top of the stairs. Callah climbed the steps, her heart pounding harder with each one. She stopped outside the door, raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. This was it. Once she did this, there was no going back. She knocked. Footsteps inside, then the door opened. Yates stood there, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking surprised, and something else she couldn't quite name. Callah, can I come in? He stepped back and she walked past him into the small room. He closed the door but didn't move closer, giving her space. I've been thinking about your offer, she said, not looking at him. And? I need to know what you expect. If I agree to this, if I marry you, what does that mean? Yates was quiet for a moment. It means you and the children come with me. We find a place, build a home. I work the land, you run the house. We raise them together. And at night? He understood what she was asking. That's up to you. I'm not looking for a woman to warm my bed. I'm looking for a partner. She turned to face him then, searching his expression for the lie. But all she saw was honesty, plain and unflinching. Why? She asked softly. Why would you do this? Because I owe you. The debt's the other way around. Not the one I'm talking about. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She looked away, blinking hard. I can't promise you love, she said. I don't have that in me anymore. I'm not asking for it. What are you asking for? A chance to make things right. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down. I need time. You've got 2 more days. That's not enough. It's what I have. Callah closed her eyes. 2 days. 48 hours to decide the rest of her life. When she opened them again, Yates was watching her with an expression she remembered from a long time ago. Patient, steady, like he'd wait as long as it took. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. He'd said so himself. I'll give you my answer tomorrow, she said. He nodded. Fair enough. She walked to the door, then stopped with her hand on the knob. Yates? Yeah? If I say yes, if I do this, I need to know you won't leave. No matter how hard it gets. I won't leave. How can I trust that? Because I already left once, he said quietly, and I've regretted it every day since. Callah looked at him for a long moment, then slipped out the door and disappeared down the stairs. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her children breathe and trying to imagine a different life. A life where she wasn't alone. A life where someone else carried half the burden. A life where maybe, just maybe, she could stop running on fumes and actually rest. It sounded impossible. It sounded too good to be true. But then again, so had Duncan's promises, and she'd believed those. Look where that had gotten her. The difference, she thought, was that Yates wasn't promising anything except to stay. He wasn't offering love or happiness or any of the things women were supposed to want. He was offering partnership, work, survival. And strangely, that felt more honest than any pretty words ever could. By morning, she'd made her decision. She got the children dressed, fed them what little she had, and walked them into town. They went to the hotel together, hand in hand, Jonah asking questions and Bess humming to herself. Calla knocked on the door of room 7. Yates opened it, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll marry you." He stared at her, and for a moment something like relief crossed his face. Then he nodded. "All right. But I have conditions." "Name them." "We find a place before winter, somewhere with good land, near enough to a town that I can get help if I need it. You teach Jonah to work, and you don't lay a hand on either of them in anger. Ever. Done. And if this doesn't work, if we can't make it, you let me go. No holding the debt over my head, no trying to keep me somewhere I don't want to be." Yates was quiet for a moment, then he extended his hand. "You have my word." Calla looked at his hand, calloused and scarred, offered without expectation. She took it. "Then we have a deal." They were married 3 hours later in the sheriff's office, with Garrett and the hotel owner as witnesses. There was no ceremony, no vows beyond the legal ones. Calla wore the same faded dress she'd had on when Yates first rode up to her house. The children stood beside her, confused but quiet, sensing that something important was happening. When it was done, the sheriff shook Yates's hand and kissed Calla's cheek. "You take care of her," he said to Yates. "I will." Calla gathered the children, and they walked out into the sunlight. Yates had a wagon waiting, already loaded with supplies. He helped her up, then lifted Jonah and Bess into the back. As they rolled out of town, Calla looked back once at the broken house, the struggling garden, the life she was leaving behind. She felt no grief at the sight, only a strange, fragile sense of possibility. Beside her, Yates kept his eyes on the road ahead. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say yet. They were strangers bound by necessity, heading into an uncertain future. But for the first time in a long time, Calla felt like she could breathe. The wagon jolted over ruts in the road, and Bess whimpered from the back. Calla turned, reaching between the supplies to steady the girl, but Yates was faster. He pulled the reins, slowing the horses to an easier pace. "Better?" he asked without looking at her. "Yes." They rolled on in silence. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. Ahead, the land stretched flat and endless, broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. The sky was enormous, pale blue fading to white at the edges. Jonah leaned over the side of the wagon, watching the wheels turn. "Where are we going?" "North," Yates said. "There's land up that way. Good soil. Water nearby." "How far?" 3 days, maybe 4. The boy considered this. "Is there a town?" "Small one called Ridgeway, about 8 miles from the property." Calla glanced at him. "You've already bought land?" "Claimed it. Haven't built on it yet." "So there's nothing there?" "Not yet." She turned forward again, her hands tight in her lap. Nothing. They were heading to nothing, with 2 children and a man she barely knew anymore. The fragile sense of possibility she'd felt leaving town was already fraying at the edges. "There's a line shack," Yates added, as if reading her thoughts, "from when cattlemen used to run stock through. It's rough, but it'll keep the rain off until we get something better built." "How rough?" "Roof leaks, no windows, dirt floor." Calla closed her eyes. "Of course it does." "We'll make it work." She didn't answer. Behind her, Bess had fallen asleep, curled against a sack of flour. Jonah was still watching the landscape roll by, his face serious in a way that made him look older than his years. The first night, they camped in a clearing near a creek. Yates unhitched the horses and led them to water, while Calla spread blankets on the ground for the children. There was no tent, no shelter except the wagon itself. The sky overhead was cloudless, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue. Yates built a fire and set a pot of beans to cook. Calla sat with the children, Bess in her lap, and Jonah pressed against her side. The silence between her and Yates stretched out, awkward and heavy. Finally, Jonah spoke. "Are you our pa now?" Yates looked up from the fire. Calla felt her chest tighten. "I'm your mother's husband," Yates said carefully. What you call me is up to you. Jonah frowned, working through this. What should I call you? Yates is fine. Mama says it's disrespectful to call grown folks by their first name. Then call me whatever feels right. The boy thought about this, then nodded and went back to watching the fire. Calla stroked Bess's hair, grateful that her daughter was too young to ask questions she didn't know how to answer. After they'd eaten, Calla put the children to bed in the wagon. She tucked the blankets around them, kissed their foreheads, and climbed back down. Yates was banking the fire, spreading the coals to let them burn low and steady through the night. I'll sleep under the wagon, he said. You take the bedroll by the fire. You don't have to. I know. He pulled his saddle over to use as a pillow and settled himself on the ground. Calla stood there a moment longer, then wrapped herself in the blanket he'd laid out and sat near the dying flames. The night sounds rose around them. Crickets, the rustle of wind through grass, the soft snuffle of the horses. Calla stared into the embers and tried not to think about what she'd done. Tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Calla. She looked over. Yates was lying on his back, hands behind his head, looking up at the stars. We're going to be all right, he said. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. She wanted to argue, to point out all the reasons he was wrong. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of coals and the steady rhythm of his breathing. The second day was harder. The sun climbed high and brutal, turning the wagon into an oven. Bess cried from the heat, and Jonah complained about being thirsty. Calla rationed the water carefully, but by midday, the canteens were running low. There's a creek up ahead, Yates said. We'll stop there. But when they reached it, the creek was barely a trickle. The banks cracked and dry. Yates refilled the canteens with what little there was, then wet his bandana and handed it to Calla. For the children. She took it, pressing the cool cloth to Bess's forehead, then Jonah's. The boy squinted up at her. Is it always going to be like this? Like what? Hot and dry and nothing to see. Calla looked out at the endless stretch of brown grass and pale sky. I don't know, sweetheart. Yates climbed back onto the wagon. It'll be better when we get there. Land I claimed has a river running through it. Trees, shade, you'll see. Jonah didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. They rolled on, the heat pressing down like a weight. That evening, they made camp near a stand of scrub oak. Yates shot a rabbit, and Calla roasted it over the fire while the children played in the dirt, too tired to go far. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was food, and they ate it without complaint. After supper, Calla washed the tin plates and the last of the water from the creek. Yates sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. The children were already asleep in the wagon, worn out from the long day. Can I ask you something? Calla said. Yates looked up. Go ahead. Why did you leave? The question hung in the air between them. Yates set the rifle aside and was quiet for a long moment. I didn't think I was good enough for you, he said finally. You had plans, a life you wanted. I was just a drifter with no prospects and a bad habit of making poor choices. So you made another poor choice by leaving. Yeah. He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. I thought you'd be better off without me. I wasn't. I know that now. Calla set the plates aside and wrapped her arms around her knees. I waited for you. For months I waited. And then Duncan came along, and he said all the right things, and I was so tired of being alone, so I said yes. Did you love him? I thought I did. Or maybe I just wanted to. She stared into the fire. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. She looked at him, surprised. Why? Because I need to know if you can forgive me. Calla was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't know if I can, but I'm willing to try. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something, and Yates nodded like he understood that was the best she could offer. The third day brought clouds, low and heavy, promising rain that never came. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. Bess was fretful, and Jonah had gone silent, staring at the horizon like he was looking for something he couldn't name. By evening, they reached the property. Yates pointed to a break in the trees. That's it, just through there. Calla's heart sank as the wagon rolled into the clearing. The line shack was worse than she'd imagined, barely more than 4 walls and a sagging roof. One corner had collapsed entirely, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds grew tall around the foundation, and something had made a nest in what was left of the chimney. "This is it?" she said. "For now." Jonah climbed down from the wagon and walked to the shack, peering inside. "Smells bad." "We'll air it out," Yates said. Calla sat frozen on the wagon seat, staring at the ruin in front of her. This was what she'd traded her life for, a collapsing shack in the middle of nowhere, with a man she didn't trust and 2 children depending on her to make it work. "Calla," Yates's voice was quiet. "I know it's not much." "Not much?" She turned to him, her voice sharp. "It's nothing. It's worse than nothing. It's a start." "A start to what? Dying out here?" "Because that's what's going to happen if this is all you've got." His jaw tightened. "I told you it was rough." "Rough doesn't cover it. This place is a death trap." "Then we'll fix it." He climbed down from the wagon, his movements stiff. "We'll patch the roof, repair the walls, make it livable." "With what? We've got a wagon full of supplies and no lumber, no tools worth mentioning, and winter's coming." "I know that." "Do you?" She slid down from the seat, her legs shaking with exhaustion and anger. "Because it seems like you didn't think this through at all." "I thought it through plenty." His voice was hard now, defensive. "This land is good. The river's close, soil's rich. We can build something here." "Not before winter, we can't." They stared at each other, the tension crackling between them. Jonah stood in the doorway of the shack, watching them with wide eyes. Bess started to cry in the wagon. Calla closed her eyes, took a breath, and forced herself to calm down. "All right, fine. Let's see what we can do." She walked past Yates, scooped Bess out of the wagon, and carried her toward the shack. Jonah stepped aside to let her in. The interior was as bad as the outside. Dirt floor, holes in the roof, debris scattered everywhere. A rusted stove sat in one corner, its pipe broken and hanging at an angle. The air smelled of rot and animal droppings. Calla set Bess down and looked around, trying to see past the disaster to something, anything, salvageable. There wasn't much. Yates appeared in the doorway. "I'll start clearing it out." "We'll need water. Where's this river you mentioned?" "Quarter-mile east." "That's too far to carry water for cooking and washing. I'll rig something, a cart maybe, or we need a well." "That takes time." "Then we better start now." He nodded, his expression grim, and went back outside. Calla heard him rummaging through the wagon, pulling out tools. Jonah tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry." "I know, baby. Let me get a fire started." But there was no wood, no kindling, nothing dry enough to burn. Calla walked outside and found Yates dragging a broken beam out of the shack. "I need firewood." "I'll get some." "When?" "Soon as I finish clearing this. The children need to eat now." He stopped, wiped sweat from his forehead, and looked at her. "I can't do everything at once, Calla. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to prioritize." "I am prioritizing. This place needs to be cleared before we can do anything else. And my children need to eat before they go to bed." They were at it again, voices rising. Calla felt the frustration building in her chest, hot and tight. This was a mistake. She'd made a terrible mistake, and now they were all going to pay for it. Yates threw down the beam. "Fine, I'll get wood." He stalked off toward the trees, and Calla stood there, shaking with anger and exhaustion. Jonah crept up beside her. "Are you and Yates fighting?" "We're just—" She stopped, forced a smile she didn't feel. "We're just figuring things out, sweetheart. It's going to be fine." But she didn't believe it, and from the look on Jonah's face, neither did he. Yates came back with an armload of deadfall, and Calla built a fire outside the shack. She heated beans and hardtack, and they ate in silence, the children picking at their food. When it was dark, Calla made beds on the floor inside, using blankets to cover the worst of the dirt. "Where are you sleeping?" she asked Yates. "Outside. I'll keep watch." "For what?" "Anything." She didn't argue. She was too tired. She lay down between the children, pulled them close, and closed her eyes. Around her, the shack creaked and settled. Something scurried in the walls. The wind whistled through the gaps in the roof. Outside, she could hear Yates moving around, checking the horses, feeding the fire. She wondered if he regretted this as much as she did. The next morning, they started work in earnest. Yates began patching the roof while Calla scrubbed the inside of the shack, trying to make it habitable. Jonah helped where he could, carrying debris outside and stacking it in a pile. Bess played in the dirt, making patterns with sticks. The work was brutal. The sun beat down, and there was no shade except inside the stifling shack. Calla's hands blistered from scrubbing, and her back ached from bending over. By midday, she was dizzy with heat and exhaustion. "Take a break," Yates called from the roof. "I'm fine." "You're not. Sit down before you fall down." She wanted to argue, but her legs were shaking. She sat on an overturned crate and pressed her hands to her face. Yates climbed down and handed her a canteen. "Drink." She drank, the water warm and metallic, but it helped. He sat beside her, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "This is harder than I thought it would be," she admitted. "Yeah." "Are we going to make it?" He looked at her, and for a moment she saw doubt flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the stubborn determination she remembered. "We'll make it," he said. "How can you be sure?" "Because we don't have a choice." It wasn't comforting, but it was honest, and somehow that made it better. They worked through the afternoon, making slow progress. By evening, the roof was patched enough to keep out most of the rain, and the inside of the shack was marginally cleaner. Calla cooked supper over the fire, and they ate together, too tired to talk. That night, as Calla lay in the dark listening to the children breathe, she thought about what Yates had said. "We don't have a choice." It was true. They were here now, and there was no going back. She'd have to find a way to make this work, for the children's sake, if not her own. The days blurred together after that. Wake at dawn, work until dark, collapse at night. Slowly, the shack began to take shape. Yates reinforced the walls and built a makeshift door. Calla scrubbed the floors and hung blankets over the holes that would eventually be windows. Jonah proved surprisingly useful, fetching tools and holding boards steady while Yates hammered. Bess stayed close to Calla, her small hands helping in ways that were more hindrance than help, but Calla didn't have the heart to send her away. At night, they ate simple meals and fell into bed exhausted. Yates still slept outside, giving Calla and the children the shack. She told herself it was for the best, but sometimes she woke in the dark and wondered what it would be like to have someone beside her, sharing the weight of the night. 2 weeks in, they hit their first real problem. Yates was digging the well when the ground gave way, and he fell hard, wrenching his shoulder. He climbed out, his face pale with pain, and Calla knew without asking that it was bad. "Let me see." "It's fine." "It's not fine. Sit down." He sat, and she examined his shoulder carefully. It wasn't dislocated, but it was badly strained. He'd need to rest it, which meant the work would fall to her. "I can still—" "No." Her voice was firm. "You'll make it worse. I'll handle it." "Calla, I said I'll handle it." She spent the next week doing the work of 2 people, hauling water, chopping wood, finishing the repairs Yates had started. Her hands bled, her muscles screamed, but she kept going. At night, she fell into bed too tired to even dream. Yates watched her with something like guilt in his eyes, but he didn't argue. He stayed off the shoulder, doing what he could one-handed, and took care of the children while she worked. It was during this time that something began to shift between them. Not love, not yet, but a grudging respect, born of shared hardship and the slow realization that they were in this together. One evening, as Calla was carrying water from the creek, Yates met her halfway and took the buckets from her hands. "I can manage," she said. "I know, but you don't have to." They walked back to the shack together, and for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel awkward. It felt like partnership. By the time his shoulder healed, the shack was livable. Not comfortable, but livable. The roof no longer leaked, the door closed properly, and there were actual beds instead of blankets on the dirt. Calla had even planted a small garden, though whether anything would grow was anyone's guess. One morning, Yates saddled his horse and announced he was riding to Ridgeway for supplies. "I'm coming with you," Calla said. "Someone needs to stay with the children." "Then someone needs to watch them while we both go. I need to see the town, meet people, figure out where we stand." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, we'll bring them along." The ride to Ridgeway took most of the morning. The town was small, a main street, a handful of buildings, a church at one end. People stopped to stare as they rode in, curious about the newcomers. Yates stopped at the general store, and they went inside. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with sharp eyes, looked them over. "Help you folks?" "Need supplies," Yates said. "Flour, sugar, nails, lamp oil." While he negotiated, Calla wandered the store with the children, There wasn't much: basic goods, a few bolts of fabric, some tools, but it was more than she'd seen in weeks, and she felt a strange pang of longing for the simple act of shopping. "You new around here?" a woman asked. Calla turned. The woman was about her age with a kind face and tired eyes. She smiled. "Yes, we've got land about 8 miles out." "The old Tierney claim." "I suppose so. My husband staked it." "Well, welcome. I'm Margaret Hollis. My husband runs the feed store." They shook hands, and Calla felt something ease in her chest. A friendly face. A potential ally. "If you need anything," Margaret said, "you come find me. It's hard out here for women. We have to look out for each other." "Thank you." They talked for a few more minutes before Yates called to her. Calla gathered the children, said goodbye to Margaret, and climbed back onto the wagon. As they rode out of town, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. It wasn't much, a conversation, a handshake, but it was something. A thread connecting her to the world beyond the shack. "You all right?" Yates asked. "Yeah." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same exhaustion she felt mirrored in his face. "I think I might be." He nodded, and they rode on in comfortable silence, the children dozing in the back. That night, as Calla put the children to bed, Jonah looked up at her. "Mama, are we going to stay here?" "Yes, sweetheart. This is home now." "Do you like it?" She thought about lying, giving him the answer he needed to hear, but instead she said, "I'm learning to." It wasn't a yes, but it was honest, and Jonah seemed satisfied. After the children were asleep, Calla went outside. Yates was sitting by the fire, carving something from a piece of wood. She sat down beside him. "What are you making?" "Toys for the kids. Figured they could use something to play with." She watched his hands move, steady and sure. "That's kind of you." "They're good kids. They deserve it." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Calla said, "I'm sorry I've been hard on you." Yates looked up, surprised. "You've had reason to be." "Maybe. But you've been trying. I can see that." "I want this to work, Calla. I know it's not what you imagined, but I want us to build something good here." "So do I." She took a breath. "I think we can, if we keep working at it." "Yeah." He smiled, just a little. "I think so too." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was a start, fragile and tentative, like the first green shoots pushing up through hard ground. And for now, that was enough. The next morning brought rain, hard and cold, drumming against the patched roof. Calla woke to the sound of water dripping through gaps they'd missed, pooling on the dirt floor near the stove. She sat up, her body aching from weeks of labor, and looked at the leak with something close to despair. Yates was already awake, standing in the doorway, watching the downpour. "It'll pass," he said without turning around. "When?" "Could be hours. Could be days." She pushed herself up and went to check on the children. They were still asleep, curled together for warmth. The temperature had dropped overnight, and she could see her breath in the air. "We need a better stove," she said. "This one barely puts out heat." "I know. I'll see what I can do." "With what money?" "We spent most of what we had on supplies." Yates turned to face her. "I'll figure something out." "That's what you keep saying." "Because it's true." She wanted to argue, to point out all the things they still needed and couldn't afford. Instead, she pulled her shawl tighter and went to start the fire. The wood was damp, and it took 3 tries to get it lit. When the flames finally caught, they smoked badly, filling the shack with acrid gray clouds. Bess woke coughing. Calla scooped her up and carried her outside, despite the rain, just to get her clear air. Yates followed with Jonah, and they stood under the overhang Yates had built, watching the water come down in sheets. "Is the river going to flood?" Jonah asked. "Might," Yates said. "We're far enough back, though. Should be all right." "What about the garden?" Calla looked at her small plot of struggling plants and felt her stomach drop. She'd spent days clearing rocks, turning soil, planting seeds. If the rain washed it away, they'd have nothing. "I'll check it when the rain lets up," she said. But the rain didn't let up. It poured all day, turning the ground to mud, and the creek into a roaring torrent. By evening, the garden was half under water, the carefully planted rows submerged beneath brown, churning water. Calla stood at the edge of the flood, staring at what was left. Most of the seeds were gone, washed away or drowned. A few plants clung to higher ground, bent but not broken. She knelt in the mud and tried to salvage what she could, her hands shaking with cold and frustration. Yates appeared beside her. "Come inside. You'll catch your death out here." "I need to save the garden." "There's nothing left to save." "There has to be something." Her voice cracked. "I put everything into this." "I know." He crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "But it's gone, Calla. We'll plant again in the spring." "We won't make it to spring if we don't have food." "We'll make it." She turned on him, her eyes blazing. "Stop saying that. Stop acting like everything's going to be fine when you don't know. You can't know." "You're right, I can't." His voice was quiet, steady. "But giving up won't help either." She stared at him, rain streaming down her face, and felt something break inside her. All the exhaustion, the fear, the bone-deep weariness she'd been holding back came pouring out. She covered her face with her muddy hands and sobbed. Yates didn't try to comfort her with words. He just stayed there, his hand on her shoulder, solid and present. When the worst of it passed, he helped her to her feet and led her back to the shack. Inside, she stripped off her wet clothes and changed into something dry, her hands still trembling. Yates built up the fire and heated water for tea. The children watched with wide, worried eyes. "Mama's all right," Yates told them. "She's just tired." Calla sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, and sipped the tea. It was bitter and weak, but it was warm, and that was enough. Across from her, Yates sat carving one of the toys he'd promised the children, his face set in concentration. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For what?" "For falling apart." "You didn't fall apart. You just let yourself feel something." He looked up at her. "You're allowed to do that." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Outside, the rain continued, relentless and uncaring, but inside, despite everything, they were dry and fed and together. It wasn't much, but it was something. The rain finally stopped 3 days later, leaving the land sodden and changed. The creek had carved new channels, and parts of the property that had been dry were now marsh. The garden was completely destroyed, not a single plant remaining. Yates surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "We'll need to move the garden, higher ground, away from the creek. We don't have seeds. I'll get some, next time I go to town." "With what money?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. They were out of options and running out of time. Fall was coming, and with it, the first hints of winter. If they didn't find a way to bring in food and supplies, they wouldn't survive. That night, Calla lay awake, listening to the sounds of the shack settling around her. In the corner, Yates slept on a pallet he'd made from old blankets. He'd moved inside after the rain, saying it was too wet outside, but she suspected it was more than that. He was worried about them, about her, and he wanted to be close in case something went wrong. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. She'd spent so long being alone, being the only one who could be counted on, that having someone else there felt strange, like she'd forgotten how to let someone else carry part of the weight. "Yates?" she whispered. "Yeah." "You awake?" "Yeah." She hesitated, then said, "I need to know the truth. Are we going to make it through winter?" Silence stretched between them. Then he said, "I don't know, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we do. What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure something else out." He shifted on his pallet. "I'm not going to let you and those kids starve, Calla. I promise you that." She wanted to believe him, but promises were cheap and survival was expensive. Still, his voice carried a conviction that made her think maybe, just maybe, he meant it. "All right," she said softly. "All right." The next week, Yates rode to Ridgeway and came back with news. There was work available at a cattle ranch about 20 miles west. They needed hands for the fall roundup, and the pay was decent. He'd be gone for 2 weeks, maybe 3, but he'd come back with enough money to see them through the winter. Calla felt panic rise in her chest. "You're leaving?" "Not for long, just until the roundup's done." "What am I supposed to do while you're gone?" "Keep the place running. Look after the kids. I'll leave you the rifle and enough supplies to last." "I can't do this alone, Yates." "You won't be alone. I'll come back." "That's what Duncan said." The words hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Yates's face went hard. "I'm not Duncan." "I know. I'm sorry. She pressed her hands to her face. "I can't go through that again." He crossed to her, took her hands in his. His palms were rough, calloused from work, but his grip was gentle. "Listen to me. I will come back, I swear it." She looked into his eyes and saw something there she hadn't seen before. Not just determination, but something deeper, something that looked almost like desperation. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked. "Because you matter to me. You and the kids. This," he gestured at the shack, the land around them. "This is the first real thing I've had in years. I'm not walking away from it." Calla felt her throat tighten. "All right, go. Do what you need to do." He left the next morning before the sun was fully up. Calla stood in the doorway with the children, watching him ride away until he disappeared into the trees. Then she turned back to the shack and the work that waited, and tried not to think about how long 2 weeks could feel. The first few days alone were the hardest. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. She kept the rifle close and slept fitfully, waking at the slightest noise. The children sensed her unease and became clingy, following her everywhere, afraid to let her out of their sight. But as the days passed, something shifted. She found a rhythm, a routine that made the loneliness bearable. Morning chores, tending what was left of the garden, teaching Jonah his letters while Bess played nearby. The work was hard, but it was familiar, and there was a strange comfort in knowing she could handle it. On the 5th day, Margaret Hollis showed up with a basket of food. She'd ridden out from town, she said, because she knew Yates was gone and thought Calla might need company. "That's kind of you," Calla said, overwhelmed by the gesture. "We look after each other out here," Margaret replied, "especially the women. We have to." They sat on the porch Yates had built, drinking weak coffee and watching the children play. Margaret asked questions about Calla's life before, and Calla found herself talking more than she had in months. It felt good to have another woman to talk to, someone who understood what it was like to make a life on the frontier. "Your husband seems like a good man," Margaret said. "He is, I think." Calla paused. "I'm still figuring him out. Takes time. My husband and I didn't know each other at all when we married. Our families arranged it, but we've made it work." "How?" "By showing up. Every day we choose to show up and try. Some days are better than others, but we keep trying." Calla thought about that after Margaret left. Showing up. Choosing to try. It sounded simple, but she knew it wasn't. It took courage to keep going when everything felt impossible. But maybe that was the point. Maybe courage wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about being terrified and doing it anyway. On the 10th day, a storm rolled in. Not rain this time, but wind, fierce and howling, tearing at the shack like it wanted to rip it apart. Calla huddled with the children in the corner farthest from the door, praying the walls would hold. Something slammed against the side of the shack, and Jonah screamed. Calla pulled him close, her heart hammering. Outside, she could hear things breaking, crashing, the wind shrieking through the trees. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was eerie, broken only by the drip of water from the roof. Calla ventured outside. The damage was extensive. Part of the overhang had collapsed, and the lean-to where they kept the horses was destroyed. One of the horses was gone, broken free, and vanished into the wilderness. The other stood trembling, wild-eyed with fear. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream. Instead, she took a breath and started assessing what could be fixed. The overhang could be rebuilt. The lean-to would take more work, but she could manage something temporary. As for the missing horse, there was nothing she could do but hope it came back. She worked through the day, dragging debris, hammering boards into place, doing what she could with limited tools and knowledge. By evening, she'd managed to create a rough shelter for the remaining horse and patch the worst of the overhang. That night, as she lay in the dark with the children asleep beside her, she thought about Yates, wondered if he was all right, if the storm had reached the ranch, wondered if he was thinking about them. He came back on the 14th day, riding up to the shack just before sunset. Calla heard the hoofbeats and ran outside, her heart in her throat. He looked thinner, worn down by hard work and long hours in the saddle. But when he saw her, his face lit up with relief. "You made it," he said. "So did you." He dismounted and stood there, looking at the shack, the damage from the storm, the makeshift repairs. "What happened?" "Storm. Took out the lean-to and ran off one of the horses. I did what I could." He turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. You did good, Calla. Real good. She felt her throat close up. I was scared the whole time. Being scared doesn't mean you didn't do it. He stepped closer. You held things together. That takes strength. She wanted to tell him she didn't feel strong, that she'd been terrified every single day, convinced something terrible was going to happen. But before she could speak, Jonah came running out, shouting with joy. You came back! You came back! Yates caught the boy and lifted him up, grinning. Told you I would. Bess followed, and Yates set Jonah down to scoop her up. The children clung to him, their relief palpable. Over their heads, Yates met Calla's eyes. I brought money, he said. Enough for supplies and then some. Good. We need it. He put the children down and pulled a leather pouch from his saddlebag. There's more work if I want it. Winter jobs, mending fences, breaking horses. Won't pay as much, but it's something. Calla felt her stomach knot. More time away. Not as long. A few days here and there. I don't know if I can keep doing this. You won't have to. I'll be here more than I'm gone. He paused. Unless you don't want me here. She looked at him, this man who'd come back when he said he would, who'd worked himself to exhaustion to bring home money, who'd lifted her children like they were precious things worth protecting. I want you here, she said quietly. Something passed between them, fragile and new. Not love, not yet, but something close to it, something that felt like the beginning of trust. That night, they sat by the fire after the children were asleep. Yates told her about the roundup, the hard days and cold nights, the men he'd worked alongside. Calla told him about the storm, Margaret's visit, the long, lonely days. I thought about you while I was gone, Yates said. Yeah? Wondered if you were all right, if the kids were all right. He looked at her. Wondered if you'd still be here when I got back. Where else would I go? I don't know, but I wouldn't blame you if you left. Calla shook her head. I'm not leaving. This is my home now, for better or worse. For better or worse, he echoed. Then quietly, it's mine too. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. And for the first time since they'd arrived at the shack, Calla felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Yates took short jobs when they came up, but he was home more than he was gone. Together they worked on improving the shack, making it stronger, tighter, better able to withstand the weather. They built a proper lean-to for the horses, reinforced the roof, and started constructing a second room for storage. Jonah began helping Yates with the heavier work, learning to use tools and carry lumber. The boy was growing, changing, becoming less fearful and more confident. He called Yates by his first name still, but there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. Bess attached herself to Yates in a different way, climbing into his lap in the evenings and falling asleep against his chest. Yates handled her with surprising gentleness, his big hands careful as he carried her to bed. Calla watched these small moments and felt something in her chest begin to thaw. The wall she'd built around herself, the one that had kept her safe and alone, was starting to crack. And instead of being terrified, she found herself almost grateful. One evening, as they worked side by side preparing supper, Yates said, I've been thinking. About what? This place. What we want it to be. He gestured at the shack. This was supposed to be temporary. We need to start planning for something better. A real house? Yeah. With a foundation, glass windows, a wood floor, rooms for the kids, a proper kitchen for you. Calla looked around the shack, at the rough walls and dirt floor, the patched roof and makeshift furniture. It had kept them alive, but it wasn't a home. Not really. That sounds nice, she said, but we can't afford it. Not yet. But if I keep working, if we save... He stopped, then started again. I want to build you something real, Calla. Something that'll last. She set down the knife she'd been using and turned to him. Why? Because you deserve it. You and the kids. You deserve better than this. We're making do. Making do isn't the same as living. He looked at her, his expression serious. I want us to live. Really live. Not just survive. Calla felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Yates reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. She didn't pull away. Together, she said finally. Together. That night, something shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, like ice beginning to melt at the edges of a frozen river. But it was real, and it changed everything. Calla lay in bed afterward, listening to Yates breathe on his pallet across the room. The children were asleep between them, their small bodies warm and safe. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, the shack was still. She thought about the decision she'd made weeks ago, agreeing to marry a man she didn't trust for the sake of survival. It had felt like giving up, like settling for less than she deserved. But now, lying here in the dark, she wondered if maybe it wasn't settling. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was choosing to build something from the wreckage of the past. Maybe it was deciding that survival wasn't enough, that she wanted more, that she wanted to live. Calla? Yates's voice was quiet in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance, for not giving up on this. She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Thank you for coming back. I'll always come back. And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. The fall deepened, the days growing shorter and cooler. Yates took one more job before winter set in, and this time Calla didn't panic when he left. She knew he'd come back. And he did, 3 days later, with money and news of more work come spring. They spent the weeks before winter preparing, gathering firewood, storing what food they had, sealing gaps in the walls. Yates taught Jonah to hunt, and the boy came back with his first rabbit, so proud he was practically glowing. Calla showed Bess how to help with cooking and mending, simple tasks that made the girl feel useful. At night, they sat together as a family, telling stories and playing games Yates carved from wood. The shack was crowded and rough, but it was theirs, and that made it home. One night, as they were settling in for bed, Bess looked up at Yates with her wide, serious eyes. Are you our papa now? Yates glanced at Calla, uncertain. She nodded slightly, giving him permission. If you want me to be, he said carefully. Bess thought about this. I think I do. Yates's face softened. Then I am. Jonah, listening from his pallet, said quietly, Me too. Calla felt her heart swell. These children who'd lost so much were choosing to let someone in again, choosing to risk love and trust and all the things that could hurt them. They were braver than she'd given them credit for. That night, after the children were asleep, Calla moved her bedroll closer to Yates's. Not touching, but close enough to feel his presence. He reached out in the dark, his hand finding hers, and they lay there in silence, fingers intertwined. No words were necessary. They both understood what was happening. The marriage that had started as a transaction, a cold exchange of survival for debt, was becoming something real, something neither of them had expected. Winter came early that year, bringing snow and bitter cold. But inside the shack, they were warm. They had food, firewood, and each other. It wasn't luxury, but it was enough. And slowly, carefully, Calla began to let herself hope that maybe it would always be enough. The first snow came 2 weeks later, soft and quiet in the night. Calla woke to a world transformed, everything covered in white that glowed pale blue in the early light. She stood in the doorway, her breath misting in the cold air, and felt a strange mix of wonder and dread. Beautiful, yes, but also dangerous. Yates came up behind her close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. We'll be all right, he said, reading her thoughts. We've got enough wood to last, and the supplies will hold if we're careful. If. We will be. He touched her shoulder briefly, then moved past her to check the lean-to. The horses shifted restlessly in their shelter, their breath steaming. Yates fed them from the dwindling supply of hay and came back brushing snow from his shoulders. I need to ride to Ridgeway, he said. Get a few things before the roads get bad. Calla felt anxiety spike in her chest. How long? There and back in a day if the weather holds. And if it doesn't? Then I'll wait it out in town and come home when I can. He looked at her steadily. I'm not taking risks, Calla. Not anymore. She wanted to tell him not to go at all, to stay where it was safe, but they needed supplies and someone had to get them. Be careful. I will. He left after breakfast, and Calla spent the day keeping busy to avoid thinking about everything that could go wrong. She taught the children their letters, mended clothes that were wearing thin, baked bread from the last of the flour. By evening, when Yates hadn't returned, she told herself it was fine. The weather had probably slowed him down. By the second morning, she was pacing. "Mama, when's Yates coming back?" Jonah asked. "Soon, sweetheart." "But you said yesterday he'd be back yesterday." "I know, but sometimes things take longer than we expect." Bess clutched her rag doll, her lower lip trembling. "Is he lost?" "No, baby. He's just being careful." Calla pulled both children close, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "He'll be home soon." He came back that afternoon, the wagon loaded with supplies and a man riding beside him. Calla's relief turned to confusion as they approached. The stranger was older, gray-bearded, with a kind face weathered by years of sun and wind. "This is Doc Farley," Yates said as he climbed down. "From Ridgeway. I asked him to come take a look at you and the kids." "We're fine," Calla said quickly. "Humor me." Yates started unloading the wagon. "It's winter, we're isolated, and I want someone with medical knowledge to check everyone over." Doc Farley dismounted with a slight groan. "Your husband's right, ma'am. Better to catch problems early than wait until they're serious." Calla wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She led the doctor inside while Yates continued unloading. Doc Farley examined the children first, checking their eyes, ears, and throats, listening to their breathing. He pronounced them healthy, but suggested they needed more vegetables in their diet. "Hard to come by in winter," Calla said. "I know. Do your best." He turned to her. "Your turn, Mrs. Cade." The examination was thorough and professional. When he was done, he packed his instruments away and looked at her seriously. "You're underweight and exhausted. Not uncommon for frontier women, but it's something to watch. You need to eat more. Rest when you can." "I eat enough." "You give the children the best portions and take what's left. I've seen it 100 times. He softened his tone. "I'm not criticizing. Just telling you that if you want to keep taking care of them, you need to take care of yourself too." After he left, Calla helped Yates put away supplies. There was more than she'd expected: flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, coffee. He'd also brought fabric, lamp oil, and a jar of peppermint sticks for the children. "This must have cost everything you made," she said. "Most of it." He set a sack of flour in the corner. "But we needed it." "We needed you to save some too, for emergencies." "This is me planning for emergencies." He straightened, wiping his hands. "If we're snowed in for weeks, we'll have what we need." That night, after the children were asleep, Calla sat mending by lamplight while Yates sharpened tools. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters, but inside it was warm. "Thank you for bringing the doctor," she said. "You're welcome." "I mean it. That was thoughtful." He looked up, surprised by her tone. "I worry about you. About all of you." "I know." She set down her mending. "I'm not used to someone worrying about me." "You should be. You deserve it." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. There was an intensity in his expression that she'd noticed more and more lately, like he was trying to tell her something but couldn't find the words. "Yates, I need to say something." He set down the whetstone. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond." Her heart started to beat faster. "All right." "When I came to collect that debt, I told myself it was just business, that I was doing the practical thing, offering you a way out that benefited both of us." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth is, I've thought about you every day since I left 5 years ago. Wondered what happened to you, if you were happy, if you ever thought about me." Calla opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. When I found you in that broken-down house, struggling to survive, it broke something in me. I couldn't leave you there, and I couldn't just give you the money because I knew you'd never accept charity. So I made the offer I made, telling myself it was practical. But Calla, it was never just practical. Not for me." He stood, crossed to where she sat, and knelt in front of her so they were eye to eye. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "Maybe I never stopped. And I need you to know that even if you don't feel the same way. Even if you never do. I need you to know that this, us, it means everything to me." Calla stared at him, her mind reeling. Part of her wanted to pull back, to protect herself from the vulnerability of letting someone in that deeply. But another part, the part that had been slowly thawing over the past months, wanted something different. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Trust someone like that. Let myself feel that way again. Her eyes filled with tears. Duncan broke something in me, Yates, and I don't know if it can be fixed. It can. He took her hands. Not all at once, maybe. Not easily, but it can. How do you know? Because I see you doing it every day. I see you choosing to trust me even when it scares you. I see you letting the kids get attached even though they could lose me. That's courage, Calla. That's you fixing what's broken. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm so tired of being scared. I know. He reached up and wiped the tear away with his thumb. But you don't have to be scared alone anymore. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together in the lamplight. Then, slowly, carefully, she kissed him. It wasn't like the perfunctory kiss they'd shared at their wedding. This was real, tentative and sweet, and full of possibility. When they pulled apart, Yates was smiling. Does this mean? It means I'm trying, she said. It means I want this to be real. It is real. It has been for a while now. She nodded, feeling something settle in her chest, something that felt almost like peace. Yeah, I think it has. That night, she moved her bedroll to lie beside his. Not for warmth, not for practicality, but because she wanted to. Because for the first time since Duncan left, she wanted to share her space, her life, her heart with someone. They lay facing each other in the darkness, hands clasped between them, and Calla felt the last of her walls beginning to crumble. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. What are you thinking? Yates asked. That I'm glad you came back. To collect the debt? To collect me. He squeezed her hand and they drifted off to sleep like that, together in every sense that mattered. The weeks that followed were the hardest they'd faced yet. The snow kept coming, piling higher and higher until the shack was nearly buried. The cold was brutal, seeping through every crack despite their efforts to seal them. They burned through firewood faster than Yates had anticipated, and he spent hours each day trudging through snowdrifts to gather more. Food became scarce. The supplies Yates had bought stretched further than they should have because Calla was careful, measuring out portions with precision. But even so, by mid-January, they were down to the basics: beans, cornmeal, and a little salt pork. Jonah started complaining of hunger. Not whining, just stating it as fact. I'm hungry, Mama. I know, sweetheart. We all are. Yates came in from chopping wood, his face red from cold. He looked at the meager pot of beans Calla was stirring and frowned. That's not enough. It's what we have. Then I'll hunt tomorrow. There's got to be something out there. But the next day brought more snow, and the day after that. Yates tried anyway, coming back hours later empty-handed and half-frozen. Calla thawed him by the fire, her hands rubbing warmth back into his. This isn't working, he said through chattering teeth. What choice do we have? I could try to make it to town, get more supplies. You'd never make it. The snow's too deep. Then we ration harder. We're already rationing as hard as we can. She sat back on her heels. We'll make it, Yates. We just have to hold on a little longer. But a little longer turned into weeks, and the hunger became a constant presence. Calla felt it gnawing at her, making her weak and lightheaded. The children were quieter now, conserving energy. Even Bess stopped playing, just sitting with her doll and staring at nothing. One morning, Calla woke to find Yates gone. She panicked, pulling on her boots and rushing outside. He was at the edge of the clearing checking a line of snares he'd set days ago. Anything? She called. He turned, and her heart sank at the look on his face. No. She walked to him, her feet crunching in the snow. We'll figure something out. How? We're down to nothing, Calla. Another week and we'll be out of food entirely. Then we'll find something else to eat. Roots, bark, I don't know, but we won't starve. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Because we've made it this far, and we're not giving up now. You hear me? We're not giving up. He stared at her, and something in his expression shifted. You're right, you're right. He pulled her close, holding her tight. We're going to make it. That afternoon, the snare finally caught something. A scrawny rabbit, barely enough meat for one meal. But Calla stretched it as far as it would go, making a thin stew that at least gave them something warm in their bellies. That night, as they huddled together for warmth, Jonah said quietly, I'm scared. Calla pulled him close. I know, baby. Are we going to die? No. Her voice was firm. We're going to live. We're going to make it through this winter, and when spring comes, we're going to plant a garden twice as big as before. We're going to have vegetables and maybe even some chickens, and none of us will ever be this hungry again. Promise? She looked at Yates over the boy's head. He nodded slightly. I promise, she said. 2 days later, the weather broke. The sun came out, pale and weak but present. Yates went hunting and came back with a deer, a miracle that felt like deliverance. They butchered it carefully, wasting nothing, and for the first time in weeks, they ate until they were full. The children's faces changed, color returning to their cheeks. Calla felt strength seeping back into her limbs, and Yates, who'd been carrying the weight of their survival on his shoulders, finally allowed himself to relax. We're through the worst of it, he said that night. You think so? The days are getting longer. Spring's coming. Calla wanted to believe him, but she'd learned not to count on anything until it was right in front of her. Still, there was hope in his voice, and she let herself borrow some of it. What's the first thing you'll do when the snow melts? She asked. Start building the house, the real one. He looked at her. What about you? Plant that garden I promised Jonah, she smiled. And maybe take a bath that isn't in a bucket of half-frozen water. He laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so welcome that she laughed too. The children looked up, startled, then started giggling, and for a moment the shack was full of warmth and light and the sound of a family finding joy in the smallest things. February brought a thaw, and with it, mud. Everything was mud, thick, sucking, impossible to walk through without sinking to your ankles. But it also brought the first hints of green, tiny shoots pushing up through the earth. Yates began work on the new house, digging the foundation when the ground was soft enough. It was slow, back-breaking work, but he did it with a determination that bordered on obsession. You don't have to do this all at once, Calla said, watching him dig. I want it done before next winter. That's months away. I know, but I'm not spending another winter in that shack. And neither are you. She helped when she could, hauling rocks for the foundation, holding boards steady while he nailed them in place. The children helped too, Jonah fetching tools and Bess bringing water. It was during one of these work sessions that Margaret Hollis showed up again, this time with her husband. They'd brought lumber, a gift, they said, from the community. We heard you were building, Margaret explained. Folks wanted to help. Calla was overwhelmed. We can't accept this. Yes, you can. Margaret's husband, a sturdy man named Thomas, started unloading the wagon. Out here, we take care of our own. You're one of us now. The help made all the difference. With the extra lumber and Thomas's carpentry skills, the house started to take real shape. Walls went up, a proper roof was framed. By early March, you could stand inside and imagine what it would be like when it was finished. It's beautiful, Calla said, walking through the skeleton of the structure. It will be, Yates corrected. Still got a long way to go. But we're getting there. Yeah, we are. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the shack watching the sunset, Calla said, I've been thinking. About? About us. About what we're building here. And I think I'm ready to make this real. Not just the marriage on paper, but everything it means. Yates turned to look at her. You sure? I'm sure. She took his hand. I love you, Yates. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. His face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. Good. We'll be scared together. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Calla felt the last piece of her broken heart click back into place. It wasn't perfect. There were still cracks, still scars that would never fully heal. But it was hers, and it was whole, and that was enough. That night, they became husband and wife in truth, not just in name. And when morning came, everything felt different. Not because anything had fundamentally changed, but because they'd chosen each other. Really chosen, with open eyes and full hearts. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it warmth and new growth. Calla planted her garden, twice as large as she'd promised Jonah. Yates worked on the house whenever he wasn't taking jobs in town. The children grew taller, stronger, their laughter filling the clearing. By April, the house was habitable. Not finished, there was still work to be done on the interior, but solid and weatherproof. They moved their belongings from the shack to the new house, and Calla stood in the main room, looking around at what they'd built. "It's really ours," she said. "It really is." Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What do you think?" "I think it's home." And it was. Not perfect, not fancy, but theirs. Built with their own hands, held together by their determination and growing love. The shack still stood nearby, a reminder of where they'd started. But the house was where they'd live, where they'd raise the children, grow old, build a life worth having. That night, they lay in their new bedroom, listening to the sounds of the house settling around them. "Do you ever regret it?" Calla asked. "Coming to collect that debt?" "Never, not once." He turned to face her. "Best decision I ever made." "Even when we were starving and freezing and fighting?" "Even then, because all of it led us here." She traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "I hated you when you first showed up, you know." "I know. And now I can't imagine life without you." "Good, because you're stuck with me." She smiled. "I can think of worse fates." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, in the house they'd built, in the life they were creating. Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle and steady, washing away the last traces of winter and nourishing the seeds they'd planted. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more reasons to fight and struggle and push forward. But tonight, they had this. They had each other, and that was everything. The rain continued through the night, and by morning, the world smelled green and alive. Calla woke in the new house, in the bed Yates had built with his own hands, and for a moment she just lay there, listening to the sounds of her family. Yates breathing beside her, the children murmuring to each other in the next room, the creak of wood settling into itself. She rose and dressed quietly, then went to check on Jonah and Bess. They were awake, whispering about something, their faces bright with the kind of excitement only children could muster over nothing in particular. "What are you two plotting?" she asked. "Can we go outside?" Jonah said. The rain stopped. "After breakfast. And chores." They groaned but didn't argue. Calla smiled and went to start the fire in the new stove, a real iron stove that Yates had traded 2 weeks of labor for. It heated evenly, held the temperature, and didn't smoke the way the old one had. Small victories, but they added up. Yates appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in odd directions. "Coffee?" "Almost ready." He crossed to her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed the back of her neck. "Morning." "Morning?" She leaned back into him. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." It was true for both of them. The new house felt solid in a way the shack never had. Safe. Permanent. Like they'd finally stopped running and planted roots deep enough to hold. After breakfast, Yates headed out to work on finishing the interior walls while Calla took the children to the garden. The plants were coming up strong, beans climbing the stakes she'd set, tomato seedlings pushing through the soil, rows of carrots and beets showing their first green shoots. "It's working," Jonah said, crouching to examine a bean plant. "It is." Calla felt a surge of pride. This garden was proof of what they could do when they put their minds to it. "If we take care of it, it'll take care of us." "Like family," Bess said solemnly. Calla looked at her daughter, surprised by the insight. "Yes, sweetheart. Exactly like family." They spent the morning weeding and watering, and by the time they went back inside, Calla's back ached and her hands were dirty, but she felt satisfied in a way she hadn't in a long time. This was honest work, work that mattered, work that would feed her children. That afternoon, Margaret showed up with news. There was to be a gathering in Ridgeway, a spring celebration, she called it, where people came together to eat, dance, and welcome the new season. "You should come," Margaret said. "It's a good way to meet more folks. Let people get to know you." Calla hesitated. The idea of socializing, of being among strangers, made her anxious, but she also knew Margaret was right. They couldn't live in isolation forever. "When is it?" she asked. "Saturday, 2 days from now." "I'll talk to Yates." Yates was less hesitant. "We should go. Let the kids have some fun, meet other families." "I don't have anything to wear." "Wear what you've got. Nobody's expecting fancy." Still, Calla spent the next 2 days washing and mending their best clothes, wanting to make a good impression. When Saturday came, they loaded into the wagon and headed to town. Ridgeway was transformed. Tables had been set up in the main square, loaded with food that people had brought. A fiddler played while children ran wild, and adults stood in clusters talking and laughing. It was more people than Calla had seen in one place since leaving her old town. "Stay close," she told Jonah and Bess, but they were already pulling away, drawn by the sight of other children. "Let them go," Yates said. "They'll be fine." Calla watched them run off, her instinct to protect warring with the knowledge that they needed this. Needed to be kids, to play, to remember what it was like to feel carefree. Margaret found them and introduced them around. Names and faces blurred together, but everyone was kind, welcoming. One woman, older and sharp-eyed, looked Calla up and down and said, "You're the one who married Yates Cade sight unseen." "Not exactly sight unseen," Calla said carefully. The woman snorted. "Close enough. Brave or desperate, I can't decide which. Maybe both." That got a laugh. "I like you. Name's Ruth. If you need anything, you come find me. I've been out here 30 years. I know every trick for surviving this place." They talked for a while, Ruth dispensing advice about everything from keeping meat fresh to dealing with snakes. Calla soaked it all in, grateful for the knowledge. As the afternoon wore on, the fiddler picked up the tempo, and people started dancing. Yates held out his hand to Calla. "I don't know how," she said. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They joined the others stumbling through the steps, laughing at their mistakes. Calla caught sight of Jonah and Bess dancing with other children, their faces flushed with joy, and felt her throat tighten. This was what she'd wanted for them, not just survival, but life. Joy. A chance to be children before the world demanded they grow up too fast. Later, as the sun began to set and people started packing up, a man approached Yates. He was tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to being in charge. "You're Cade, right? The one who claimed the Tierney land?" "That's right. Name's Brennan. I run cattle south of here." He extended his hand and Yates shook it. "Heard you're a hard worker. I could use someone like you come roundup time. Pays better than the outfit you worked for last fall." "I'm interested." "Good. Come see me in a few weeks. We'll work out details." Brennan tipped his hat to Calla. "Ma'am." After he left, Calla said, "That could be good for us." "Yeah, steady work, better pay." Yates looked thoughtful. "We might actually get ahead instead of just scraping by." On the ride home, the children fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from playing. Calla leaned against Yates's shoulder, watching the stars come out. "That was nice," she said. "It was. I was scared at first, but people were kind. They're good folks. Hard, maybe, but good." He glanced at her. "You did well today. I was proud of you." "For what? Talking to people?" "For being brave. For letting yourself be part of something." She thought about that. It had been hard, opening herself up to strangers, risking judgment or rejection, but it had also been worth it. She'd made connections, found people who might become friends, built a foundation for a life beyond just the four of them. "I'm glad we went," she said. "Me too." The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Yates worked on the house during the day, finishing the interior and starting on furniture. Calla tended the garden and the children, teaching them their letters and numbers, watching them grow stronger and more confident. Jonah was becoming a capable helper, learning to handle tools and follow instructions. He'd started calling Yates Pa without anyone telling him to, and Yates had accepted it with a quiet pride that made Calla's heart swell. Bess remained the baby, but she was tougher than she looked. She'd learned to gather eggs from the chickens Yates had traded for, and she helped Calla with cooking, her small hands surprisingly deft. One evening, as Calla was putting Bess to bed, the girl looked up at her seriously. "Mama, are we happy now?" The question caught Calla off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Before, you always looked sad, but now you smile more. So are we happy?" Calla felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, baby, I think we are." "Good." Bess snuggled into her blanket. "I like being happy." "Me too." She kissed her daughter's forehead and went to find Yates. He was outside, sitting on the porch they'd built, looking out at the land. She sat beside him. "Bess asked me if we're happy," she said. "What did you tell her?" "That we are." She took his hand. "Is that true? Are you happy?" He turned to look at her, and in the fading light she saw something in his face that took her breath away. Not just happiness, but contentment, peace. Yeah, he said. I really am. Are you? She thought about it honestly. Thought about the hard days, the fear, the moments when she'd been sure they wouldn't make it. Thought about the slow building of trust, the gradual opening of her heart, the realization that she was capable of loving again. Yes, she said, I am. They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the night come on. And Calla thought about how strange it was that the worst thing that had ever happened to her, being abandoned, falling into debt, nearly starving, had led to this. To a life she'd never imagined but now couldn't imagine living without. Summer came in hot and bright. The garden flourished, producing more than Calla had dared hope for. She spent long days harvesting and preserving, putting up vegetables for winter. Yates took the job with Brennan and came home each evening tired but satisfied, his pockets holding the wages that would see them through. They finished the house, adding touches that made it feel like a home. Curtains. Calla sewed from fabric Margaret had given her. A rocking chair Yates built for the porch, a shelf for the few books they owned, and the wooden toys Yates had carved for the children. One afternoon, Calla was in the garden when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see a stranger riding toward the house, a man in dusty traveling clothes with a legal-looking satchel. Her first instinct was fear. Strangers meant trouble. But Yates was working nearby, and he stepped forward to meet the man. Help you? Yates asked. Looking for Calla Prescott. Or Calla Cade, I suppose she is now. I'm Calla Cade, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. What's this about? The man dismounted and pulled papers from his satchel. I'm here on behalf of the estate of Duncan Prescott. He's deceased. I know. He died over a year ago. Yes, ma'am, but there's been a settlement of his affairs, and it turns out he had a small life insurance policy. As his widow, well, his former widow, you're entitled to the payout. Calla stared at him. I don't understand. The policy was taken out before he left. Somehow it stayed active. Not a fortune, but it's something. $300. $300. The exact amount of the debt that had brought Yates to her door. Calla felt something like laughter bubbling up in her chest, but it came out more like a sob. Are you all right, ma'am? The man asked. I'm fine. She took the papers he offered, her hands shaking. Where do I sign? After the man left, Calla and Yates stood in the yard, staring at the bank draft. $300, Yates said quietly. The same amount. Yeah. They looked at each other, and suddenly they were both laughing. The kind of laughter that came from disbelief and irony, and the sheer absurdity of life. What are the odds? Calla said. I don't know, but it feels like someone's playing a joke on us. A good joke, though. She looked at the draft. What should we do with it? It's yours. You decide. She thought about it. Thought about all the things they needed, all the ways they could use the money. But then another idea occurred to her. Let's save it, she said. For the children. For their future. So they never have to make the choices I made out of desperation. Yates nodded slowly. That's a good idea. A really good idea. They put the money in the bank in Ridgeway, opening an account in Jonah and Bess's names. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A safety net. A promise that their children would have options. That night, lying in bed, Calla said, Do you ever think about how different things could have been? How so? If you hadn't come to collect that debt, if I'd found some other way to survive. I try not to think about it, Yates admitted, because every other path I imagine ends with me alone and you and the kids suffering. This way, hard as it's been, at least we're together. Do you think we would have found our way back to each other anyway, even without the debt? I don't know, maybe, but I'm glad we didn't have to find out. Calla rolled over to face him. I used to think love was supposed to be easy, that if it was real, it wouldn't take so much work. And now? Now I think the work is what makes it real. Anyone can love someone when everything's perfect, but choosing to love someone when things are hard, when you're tired and scared and not sure you can keep going, that's when it matters. He kissed her forehead. You're wiser than I gave you credit for. I had a good teacher. Who? Life. This place. You. She touched his face. All of it. By late summer, they'd settled into a life that felt almost normal. Yates worked steadily, and Calla managed the household and garden with increasing confidence. The children thrived, growing taller and stronger, their laughter a constant presence. They had friends now, Margaret and Thomas, Ruth and her husband, the Brennan family. People who stopped by for visits, who helped when help was needed, who made the isolation of frontier life feel less isolating. One evening, there was a knock at the door. Calla opened it to find the sheriff from her old town standing there, hat in hand. "Sheriff," she said, surprised. "Ma'am, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Come in." He stepped inside, looking around at the house with approval. "You've done well for yourself." "We've worked hard." "I can see that." He cleared his throat. "I came because I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For not doing more when Duncan left. For not making sure you had what you needed. I knew you were struggling, and I should have helped more than I did." Calla was touched by the sentiment. "You did what you could, and I'm all right now. Better than all right." The sheriff nodded. "I can see that. Your husband, he's a good man. The best." "Then I'm glad. You deserve it." After he left, Yates came up behind her. "What was that about?" "Old business. Finally settled." She turned to him. "It's strange how life works out sometimes. All the pain and struggle, and then you end up somewhere you never expected, and it's better than anything you planned." "Is this better? Really?" She looked around the house they'd built, listened to the children playing outside, felt the solid warmth of Yates beside her. "Yes," she said, "this is better." Fall came, and with it, the first anniversary of their marriage. Calla woke that morning to find Yates already up, standing by the window. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Thinking." "About what?" "About a year ago. How different everything was." She joined him at the window. Outside, the land was beautiful in the early light, the leaves on the cottonwoods turning gold. "We've come a long way," she said. "Yeah, we have." He turned to her. "I know this isn't how you imagined your life would go, the marriage, the struggle, all of it." "No, but it's better than what I imagined." "Really?" "Really, because this is real. It's messy and hard and imperfect, but it's ours. We built it together, and that means something." He kissed her, long and deep, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. That evening, they celebrated quietly. Margaret and Thomas came over with a cake, Ruth brought preserves, and the Brennans sent over a ham. They ate until they were full, the children running around with other kids who'd come along, and the adults sat on the porch talking and laughing. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Calla looked around at the people gathered there. Her family, her friends, her community. A year ago, she'd been alone, desperate, willing to marry a stranger just to survive. And now she had this, a home, a husband she loved, children who were thriving, a future that looked bright. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That I'm grateful." "For what?" "For all of it, even the hard parts, because they brought me here." That winter was easier than the one before. They had plenty of food, a solid house, and the knowledge that they could weather whatever came. The snow fell, the wind blew, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Jonah turned 6 and started reading on his own, devouring the few books they had and begging for more. Bess learned to help with cooking and sewing, her small hands becoming more skilled each day. And Calla and Yates grew closer, their love deepening with each shared challenge, each quiet moment, each day of choosing to build a life together. One night in early spring, as they lay in bed listening to the first rain of the season, Yates said, "I've been thinking about expanding." "The house?" "The land. Brennan mentioned there's acreage adjacent to ours that might be available. If we could get it, we could run some cattle, maybe build up a real operation." "That would take money." "I know, but we're saving, and if I take on more work, you already work yourself to the bone." "I know, but it would be worth it. To build something bigger. Something we could pass on to the kids." Calla thought about it. The idea was appealing, a real ranch, something substantial and lasting. But it also meant more risk, more work, more years of struggling before they saw any return. "What do you think?" Yates asked. "I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think we've already built something worth having. A home, a family, a life. And if we want to grow it, then yes, let's do that. But let's not forget what we already have in the pursuit of what we might get. He was quiet for a moment. You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm not saying we shouldn't try. I'm just saying let's remember what matters. You matter. The kids. This. He gestured at the room around them. Everything else is just details. They decided to buy the land, but to do it slowly, carefully, without sacrificing the stability they'd worked so hard to build. Over the next year, Yates took jobs that paid well and saved aggressively. Calla sold vegetables and preserves in town, adding to their funds. By the following spring, they had enough to make the purchase. The new land doubled their property, giving them room to expand, to dream, to build something that would last beyond them. The day they signed the papers, Yates came home and swung Calla around in a circle. "We did it," he said. "We did." That summer, they built a barn. It took months of work, with help from friends and neighbors, but when it was finished, it stood tall and proud, a testament to what they could accomplish together. Jonah was 8 now, tall for his age and serious in the way of children who'd grown up fast. He helped with the heavy work, learning from Yates, absorbing lessons about hard work and integrity and what it meant to be a man. Bess was 6, still bright and joyful, but with a core of strength that reminded Calla of herself. She helped in the garden and the kitchen, and she'd started learning to read, her small voice sounding out words with determined focus. One evening, as Calla watched them play in the yard, she thought about how far they'd all come. These children who'd been hollow-eyed and hungry were now healthy and strong. They had a future. They had possibilities. "What are you smiling about?" Yates asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just thinking about the kids, about how different they are from when we started. They've grown. More than that, they're thriving. We gave them that. You gave them that. You're the one who kept fighting when it would have been easier to give up." She leaned into him. "We both did. We gave it to each other." That fall, they celebrated their 3rd anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. The children were in bed, and Calla and Yates sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "Do you ever miss the way things were before?" Calla asked. "When you were on your own, no responsibilities." "No, never." He said it with such conviction that she believed him. "This is what I always wanted, even when I didn't know it. A home, a family, someone to build a life with. Even when that life is hard, especially then, because the hard times are what make the good times mean something." Calla thought about that, about the truth of it. The winter they'd nearly starved had made the abundance of their garden that much sweeter. The fear of being alone had made the comfort of companionship that much more precious. "I used to think I needed someone to save me," she said. "When Duncan left and everything fell apart, I thought I needed rescue. And when you showed up offering marriage, part of me saw it that way. And now I know I didn't need saving. I needed partnership. Someone to stand beside me, not in front of me. Someone who saw me as equal, not as something to be protected or taken care of." "You saved yourself, Calla. I was just lucky enough to be there while you did it." She kissed him, soft and slow, and thought about how true that was. She'd survived. She'd adapted. She'd built a life from nothing, and she'd done it through her own strength and determination. But she'd also learned that strength didn't mean doing everything alone, that accepting help wasn't weakness, that partnership, real partnership, made everything better. The years passed, marked by seasons and growth. Jonah turned 10, then 12, then 15. Bess grew from a child into a young woman. The ranch prospered, and with it, their life became easier. Not easy, there were always challenges, always setbacks, but easier than it had been. They added more cattle, hired hands to help with the work. The house was expanded again, adding rooms for the children and a proper parlor where they could entertain guests. The garden that Calla had started as a desperate attempt to feed her family had grown into something substantial, supplying not just their own needs, but enough to sell in town. Calla became known in Ridgeway as someone to be respected. She served on committees, organized community events, and became the person other women came to when they needed advice or help. The scared, desperate woman who'd married a stranger to escape debt was gone, replaced by someone confident and capable. Yates built a reputation as a fair employer and a skilled rancher. Men sought jobs with him because they knew they'd be treated well and paid honestly. His word became currency in the region. One spring day, when Jonah was 17 and about to head east for schooling, He came to Calla with a question. "Ma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about my real father?" The question didn't hurt the way it might have once. "Sometimes, not often." "Do you hate him, Mom?" "No, I did for a while, but hate takes energy, and I needed that energy for other things." She looked at her son, so tall now, so much like Yates in the way he carried himself. "He gave me you and Bess. For that alone, I can't hate him. But he left us. He did. And that was wrong. But Yates stayed. That's what matters. He's a good man. The best." Jonah was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you married him. I know it started rough, but I'm glad." "Me too, sweetheart." After he left, Calla found Yates in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. "Jonah asked me about Duncan," she said. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That Duncan gave me my children, but you gave us a life." Yates looked at her, and she saw emotion flicker across his face. "That boy's going to do great things. They both are. Because of what we gave them. A foundation. Love. The knowledge that they can survive anything. We did do that, didn't we?" "We did." The mare shifted, and Yates went to check on her. Calla watched him work, his hands gentle despite their roughness, his voice soothing. This man who'd ridden into her life offering marriage as payment for a debt had become everything she never knew she needed. That summer, they celebrated their 10th anniversary with a party that drew people from 3 counties. There was food and music and dancing, and Calla stood in the middle of it all, looking around at what they'd built. Not just the ranch, but the community, the relationships, the life. "Happy?" Yates asked, appearing at her elbow. "Incredibly. 10 years, can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like a lifetime." "A good lifetime?" "The best." She took his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For coming back, for making that offer, for staying when it got hard, for choosing me every day for 10 years. That was the easy part. You're easy to choose." They danced, surrounded by friends and family, and Calla thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago. Desperate, angry, afraid. She barely recognized that person anymore. She'd learned so much in those years. That love wasn't something that just happened. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice. That strength came not from doing everything alone, but from knowing when to lean on someone else. That the hardest times could lead to the best outcomes if you were willing to push through them. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. That she could survive anything, build anything, become anything she needed to be. The children left home, one by one. Jonah went east to school, then came back to help run the ranch. Bess married a young man from Ridgeway, a teacher, and settled nearby. They had children of their own, and Calla became a grandmother, marveling at how the cycle continued. She and Yates grew older together, their bodies wearing down from years of hard work, but their love growing stronger. They spent evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs, talking about everything and nothing. "Do you have any regrets?" Yates asked one night. Calla thought about it honestly. There were things she'd change if she could. The years of struggle with Duncan, the hardship the children had endured. But without those things, she wouldn't have ended up here. "No," she said finally. "Not a single one. Not even marrying a stranger to pay off a debt? Especially not that. That was the best decision I ever made." He laughed. "Even though I blackmailed you into it? You gave me a choice. That's more than most women get. A choice between debt and marriage. That's not much of a choice. It was enough, and I made it freely." She looked at him. "Do you regret it?" "Never. Not for 1 second." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars come out. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer, they could hear the cattle settling for the night. "You know what I think?" Calla said. "What?" "I think we got lucky. Not because things were easy, they weren't, but because we found each other when we needed it most, and because we were both stubborn enough to make it work." Stubborn is one word for it. What would you call it? Determined? Committed? He paused. Loved. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yeah, loved." The years continued to pass. each one adding lines to their faces and aches to their joints, but also adding memories, experiences, proof that they'd lived fully and well. When Calla was 60, she stood in the garden, now tended mostly by hired help but still her domain, and thought about the seed she'd planted all those years ago in desperation, how she'd been sure nothing would grow, that the land would reject her efforts, that she'd fail. But the garden had flourished, just like her life, just like her family. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Yates approaching. He moved slower now, his limp more pronounced from an old injury, but he was still strong, still steady. "Remembering?" he asked. "Always." "What are you remembering today?" "That first garden, how scared I was that it would fail. And look at it now." She did. The garden stretched for acres, producing enough to feed 2 families and sell the surplus. It was beautiful and abundant, proof of what persistence and care could create. "We did all right, didn't we?" she said. "Better than all right. We did great." That night, lying in bed, Calla thought about everything they'd built. Not just the physical things, the house, the ranch, the prosperity, but the intangible things. Trust, love, partnership, a family that knew how to weather storms together. She'd come to understand something over the years, that the measure of a life wasn't in how easy it was, but in how you handled the difficulties. That strength wasn't the absence of fear or pain, but the ability to keep going despite them. That love, real love, was a choice you made every day, not a feeling that just existed on its own. She'd chosen Yates every day for decades, and he'd chosen her. That was what mattered. Not how they'd started, but how they'd continued. Not the debt that brought them together, but the bond they'd forged in paying it down through sweat and struggle and shared dreams. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Yates replied, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. And that, Calla thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The frontier had a way of stripping people down to their essence, revealing what they were really made of. It had stripped Calla down and shown her that she was stronger than she knew. It had brought Yates back and given him a chance to prove he was the man he'd always wanted to be. It had tested them, broken them, and forced them to rebuild. And in the rebuilding, they'd created something that lasted, something real, something that would outlive them in the children and grandchildren who carried forward their lessons about resilience and love and never giving up. That was the true payment for the debt Yates had come to collect. Not money, not even marriage in name, but a life built together, earned through every hard day and difficult choice. A life that proved that sometimes the worst circumstances could lead to the best outcomes, if you were brave enough to see them through. Calla closed her eyes, Yates's warmth beside her, and let herself drift off to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new reasons to keep choosing this life, this man, this family. But tonight, she was simply grateful. For all of it. Every single moment, hard and easy alike. Because it had led her here, to a place she'd never imagined, but now couldn't imagine leaving.